The night was quiet in Montecito, the kind of silence that only the wealthy can afford. High hedges, tall gates, and the distant hum of ocean waves painted a scene of calm privilege. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But beneath that stillness, something was stirring. Something that would soon tear through the illusion of serenity like a crack of thunder. At exactly 3:47 a.m., a line of black SUVs rolled silently up a private driveway, their headlights dimmed. The neighbors would later say it felt like a movie scene. Agents in tactical gear stepping out, radios whispering, hands resting on holstered weapons. It wasn't paparazzi this time. It was the FBI. Inside the Montecito mansion, the woman at the center of the world's fascination slept soundly, unaware that her secrets were seconds away from being unearthed. Meghan Markle, the Duchess who had once captivated hearts with her smile and charm, was about to face something she couldn't control, a force of truth. The agents moved with precision, each step echoing through marble floors and grand hallways. They knew exactly where to go, as if someone had guided them. This wasn't a random raid. This was a mission. What they found that morning would not only shock the royal family, it would send shockwaves across the entire world. Hidden behind a panel in Meghan's private study, carefully disguised as a decorative wall, was a secret room. Not just a safe room, not a closet of memorabilia. A fully equipped digital operations hub, soundproofed and sealed away from the rest of the house. And inside it, rows of labeled hard drives, encrypted tablets, and folders bearing names no one outside the royal circle should ever see. The realization hit the agents almost immediately. These weren't ordinary files. They contained hours, days of private royal conversations, including one particularly sensitive recording involving Prince William himself. That single file, later nicknamed the Windsor tape, would change everything. The air in that hidden room was thick, as though it knew it held something forbidden. Every surface gleamed with secrecy. Every blinking light pulsed with quiet menace. The lead investigator leaned closer to one drive, marked simply with the letter C. His brow furrowed as he read the attached note. Family meeting Sandringham. Do not erase. A faint static buzz filled the air when they connected it to a secure forensic laptop. And then came the voices, clear, unguarded, unmistakably royal. William's tone was calm at first, but strained, defensive. Then Meghan's voice cut through, sharp, emotional, manipulative. It wasn't just a family conversation. It was a recording that revealed power plays, threats, and personal secrets that could rewrite the monarchy's image overnight. But let's rewind for a moment. How did it come to this? How did the American actress who married into the most guarded family in the world end up being raided by federal agents in her own California mansion? That's what we're about to uncover in this video step by step, detail by detail. From the first whisper of suspicion inside the FBI's Los Angeles field office to the explosive discovery of those secret drives. You'll see how this story unfolded like a slow-burning thriller that no one saw coming. You'll hear about the private informant who tipped them off, the weeks of surveillance leading up to the raid, the coded messages hidden in Meghan's communications, and most of all, the recordings themselves, the evidence that might finally explain the royal family's silence over the past months. It all started with a simple flag, an anomaly in a data transfer between two luxury estates. According to sources close to the investigation, the FBI's cybersecurity division had been tracking encrypted signals routed through private networks. One of those routes led directly to Montecito. The data patterns matched techniques used by intelligence contractors, encrypted voice compression, timestamp irregularities, and storage segmentation across multiple devices. When they traced the signal back to Meghan's estate, alarms went off internally. Why would a private household require that level of digital security? Unless, of course, something inside needed hiding. As the pieces fell into place, quiet discussions began between agencies. Privacy law specialists, royal advisors, even the Department of Justice had to be consulted. What made the case delicate wasn't just who was involved. It was what they might find. The royal family, though technically beyond U.S. jurisdiction, had ties and influence that reached into American soil. Any investigation involving them could ignite a diplomatic firestorm. But when new information came forward, information that suggested those recordings contained not just family discussions, but potentially classified diplomatic exchanges, there was no more hesitation. The green light was given, and that's where the story takes a darker turn. Sources say Meghan had been increasingly paranoid in recent months. She stopped letting certain staff members enter her study. Her assistant reportedly quit after being asked to clear old SD cards and destroy any backups. Some even claim she mentioned keeping a record of everything for protection, though no one knew what that truly meant. Harry, according to those close to him, was distant and confused. He thought the room was just a workspace for her media ventures, a creative studio. But deep down, he must have sensed something else. A growing distance, a barrier of secrecy he couldn't cross. So when the FBI stepped in, it wasn't just an investigation into digital files. It was an excavation into trust, loyalty, and the dark corners of a marriage under pressure. As dawn broke over Montecito, neighbors recorded videos of agents carrying evidence boxes. The images spread like wildfire. Black cases, sealed envelopes, the royal crest visible on a few seized items. Social media exploded with speculation. Was Meghan hiding royal secrets? Did she spy on the monarchy? Is this the scandal that ends the Sussex era? The hashtags trended for days, while inside the estate, silence hung heavy. By midday, legal teams were already in motion. Meghan's attorneys denied all wrongdoing, calling it an outrageous violation of privacy. But the FBI statement that followed was brief and devastating. Evidence obtained from a private residence in Montecito is under review for potential violations of international communication laws. No names, no details, yet everyone knew who they meant. The world's cameras turned toward that mansion once more, waiting for someone, anyone, to step outside and speak. But no one did. Harry was reportedly taken to a secure location. Meghan, sources say, remained inside, uncooperative but calm. In the coming minutes of this video, we're going to dive deeper into what truly happened inside that hidden room, how investigators pieced together months of secret recordings, and why one particular conversation involving Prince William has become the focus of international scrutiny. We'll explore what the recordings contained, why they were made, and how this shocking discovery could alter not only Meghan's future, but the legacy of the British royal family itself. But before we move into the next chapter, let's pause on this single image. A once-beloved duchess standing in her grand home, watching as agents carry away boxes that hold the story of her downfall. Imagine the silence after they leave. The faint hum of electronics still warm from recent use. The weight of truth pressing down on the walls that once protected her secrets. Whatever she thought she was safeguarding, evidence, leverage, or protection, had now become her greatest liability. And as one investigator reportedly murmured while sealing the final evidence bag, she recorded everything, even the ones who trusted her most. The story was only beginning. What those recordings revealed would shake every royal hallway, echo through Buckingham Palace, and leave Prince Harry facing a truth too painful to ignore. But what came next, what they discovered buried in those drives, would change everything forever. The sun hadn't yet risen over California when the unmarked vehicles started pulling into the private lane that led to Meghan Markle's sprawling Montecito estate. The early dawn mist clung to the pavement, muffling the sound of tires as the FBI convoy positioned itself in a silent formation. Each movement was rehearsed, efficient, and precise. The agents wore no visible identification, just the quiet authority of men and women who knew they were about to alter the course of a global story. The neighbors, still asleep in their multi-million-dollar homes, would wake up hours later to a news feed full of flashing lights, drone footage, and the kind of headlines no one ever expects to read about their quiet neighborhood. But by then, the operation was already over. Inside the mansion, the stillness of early morning wrapped around marble floors and glass walls. Security cameras blinked softly in corners, unaware that another set of eyes was already watching them. Using a combination of warrants and encrypted entry codes, the FBI Cybercrime Division had already overridden the estate's digital defenses. Every lock, every motion sensor, every private camera feed was under federal control. For months, the team had been building this moment, mapping every hallway, tracking every pattern of activity, identifying every blind spot in the home's architecture. What they were after wasn't jewelry or cash or documents. It was something more valuable, something hidden behind code and deception. At 4:12 a.m., the lead agent gave the signal. Within seconds, the front door opened, and a team of 5 entered silently. The smell of fresh lavender, Meghan's signature scent, hung in the air. Upstairs, faint music played from a speaker in the master suite, a sleep playlist looping through soft piano notes. In another room, a motion sensor flickered but was quickly disabled. The team moved like shadows, sweeping the lower floor, marking each cleared space with a tap on their earpieces. When they reached the private study, the room Meghan was said to guard more fiercely than her own bedroom, they paused. Doors reinforced, one agent murmured. Thermal scan shows hollow space behind the north wall. The lead agent stepped forward, ran his hand along the smooth oak paneling, and found it. A barely visible seam, almost imperceptible, hidden beneath layers of varnish. A concealed entryway. He exchanged a look with his partner, nodded once, and reached for his toolkit. Within minutes, the magnetic lock clicked free, revealing a narrow passage leading into darkness. The hidden room was smaller than expected, no more than 15 feet across, but the air inside was heavy with electronics. LED lights blinked from servers stacked in neat rows. A recording console sat in the corner, surrounded by noise-canceling foam panels. On the desk lay 3 hard drives, neatly labeled with simple initials, W, C, and D. There were no photographs, no decorations, no traces of personal life. Just cold precision, as if this space wasn't part of a home at all but part of an operation. The agents exchanged glances. They had seen secure rooms before, used by journalists, corporate investigators, even private intelligence firms. But something about this one felt different. It wasn't designed for work. It was designed for concealment. Evidence secured, the team leader said quietly, placing the drives into sealed anti-static bags. A technician powered up the console and frowned. This isn't standard. There's a voice compression matrix, high-level stuff. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. He paused, scrolling through encrypted file names. Look at this. Sandringham Meeting 2020. Windsor Call 2022. Balmoral Discussion. Restricted. The agent beside him stiffened. Are those royal code names? The technician nodded slowly. They're not supposed to be public. These are internal communication labels used by the palace's media division. A silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of cooling fans. They all understood what this meant. Meghan Markle hadn't just been recording random conversations. She had somehow gained access to private royal communications, capturing moments that were never meant to leave the palace walls. Whether by hidden microphones, phone interception, or direct recordings during meetings, the evidence suggested deliberate action. The lead agent exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. All right, let's wrap this up carefully. We'll need a full digital team on standby. This goes straight to the federal evidence vault. Outside, the sun had begun to bleed over the hills, painting the sky in pale orange. The tranquility of Montecito looked almost surreal compared to what was happening inside that mansion. As the agents carried out sealed boxes and crates, the first media vans were already gathering near the gated entrance. Word had leaked. Someone inside the system had tipped off a journalist. By the time the convoy pulled away, cameras were rolling, and helicopters hovered overhead. The footage would soon dominate every major news outlet across the world. But inside those boxes lay something more powerful than any headline. A set of recordings capable of rewriting the story of the British monarchy itself. The hard drive marked W was of particular interest. Early analysis showed multiple audio files corresponding to known royal meeting dates. The metadata indicated that some of these files were recorded from within private residences, suggesting the use of covert audio devices. The implications were staggering. If Meghan had indeed planted or authorized recording equipment inside royal environments, she could face severe legal consequences under both British and American law. Meanwhile, inside the house, Meghan's personal security detail, once handpicked for discretion, was being questioned. One guard reportedly told investigators that Meghan had installed the secret room soon after stepping down from royal duties. She called it her private sanctuary. At first, they assumed it was just a creative space, a place where she could work away from prying eyes. But as time went on, fewer people were allowed near it. The cleaning staff were instructed never to touch the door, and the security logs showed that Meghan had visited the room almost daily, often late at night, sometimes for hours. When news of the raid reached London, the royal household went into immediate lockdown. Internal communications were encrypted, and crisis meetings were convened behind closed doors. No official statement was issued, but palace aides confirmed off the record that the situation is being monitored. Prince William, according to insiders, was briefed personally within hours. He listened in silence, hands clasped, face pale. When one aide mentioned the existence of recordings potentially involving him, he reportedly whispered, "Then she's crossed a line she can't return from." Back in Montecito, the agents finished their sweep. Every corner of the estate was inspected, from the goose houses to the garages. Nothing else was found, no additional rooms, no weapons, no signs of physical tampering. Only the digital evidence remained, dense with encrypted data. The FBI team lead, known for his composure, later told reporters off-record that he had never seen such organized digital architecture outside of professional intelligence setups. "It wasn't random," he said. "Every file was cataloged, time-stamped, and duplicated. Whoever built this system had a purpose, and that purpose wasn't innocent." As the vehicles disappeared down the quiet lane, the mansion stood empty and echoing, stripped of its mystery. But the echoes of that morning lingered, in the flashing cameras, in the whispered conversations across continents, in the disbelief of those who had once defended Meghan without question. It was no longer a question of rumor or gossip. There was evidence now, tangible and damning. The world would soon learn that the drives didn't just contain recordings. They contained voices of trust broken, private fears exposed, and moments that had defined the royal family's inner circle. The discovery in that hidden room was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far larger, a reckoning that would unravel relationships, reputations, and legacies. The FBI had found the truth. What they would do with it next would determine everything that followed. As dawn finally gave way to full daylight, the last of the agents stepped into his vehicle, looking once more at the mansion through the rearview mirror. He muttered softly, "It's always the quiet houses that hold the loudest secrets." And with that, the gates of the Montecito estate closed behind them, sealing off the scene of one of the most shocking discoveries in recent royal history. The next phase was about to begin. The analysis of those recordings, the unraveling of Meghan's secret digital empire, and the confrontation that would soon erupt between the Sussexes and the royal family. But what the investigators would uncover within those files would go far beyond private words. It would challenge the very foundation of loyalty itself. If only Meghan knew, in that very moment, that her fortress of privacy had become the stage for her undoing. The agents hadn't just taken her files, they had taken control of the narrative she thought she owned. And soon, the entire world would hear what those walls had been hiding. The morning after the raid, the media frenzy was unstoppable. Helicopters hovered over the Montecito skyline. Reporters lined the narrow streets leading to the Sussex residence, shouting questions into the wind. Every outlet wanted the same thing: an image of Meghan Markle, a soundbite, a glimpse of the woman whose private life had now become a federal headline. But behind those closed doors, deep within the estate, the true story was unfolding far from public view. The FBI had discovered something that morning that not even the palace had fully grasped: the depth of deception hidden within those walls. Hours before the news broke, agents were still combing through the secret room. The discovery itself had stunned them. A space constructed with precision, not luxury. Unlike the rest of the mansion, This room had no trace of Meghan's signature decor. No flowers, no artwork, no warmth. It was a cold, controlled environment, the kind that belonged to someone who didn't want to be seen or heard. The walls were lined with acoustic foam. The floor was soundproofed. A small ventilation system ran independently from the house, ensuring no sound escaped. Every inch of the room screamed secrecy. When investigators opened the drawers beneath the main desk, near the far corner of the room was a small black cabinet locked with a biometric scanner. After hours of effort, the forensics team managed to bypass it. Inside were SD cards, each in its own labeled sleeve. Kensington lunch, family therapy call, Christmas message, funeral rehearsal. Dozens of them. Each label hinted at moments that were never meant for anyone beyond the royal circle. When the agents realized what they were looking at, a heavy silence filled the air. Someone whispered, "She kept everything." The initial assumption was that Meghan had been recording her own calls, perhaps as part of a memoir or legal protection strategy. But the more they examined the evidence, the more sinister the implications became. The timestamps and voice metadata revealed that many of the recordings were not from her own devices. They were captured remotely. The data suggested multiple audio sources, conference lines, phone intercepts, possibly even in-person microphones. If proven true, it meant one thing: these recordings were not obtained by accident. The FBI contacted their legal division for clarification. Was this a matter of domestic privacy violation, or had it crossed into international intelligence? By late morning, British intelligence had been informed. Within hours, the Royal Communications Office at Buckingham Palace received confirmation that recordings involving senior royals existed and were in federal custody. Panic rippled through the institution. Royal advisors scrambled to assess the potential fallout. How many conversations had been compromised? How far did Meghan's reach extend? Meanwhile, inside the Montecito estate, investigators continued their search. In one corner of the hidden room sat a sleek laptop, its screen locked behind a rotating encryption key. The device contained a folder titled Private Archive. Took hours to crack. When they finally gained access, the first file they opened sent a chill through the room. It was a voice recording. Prince William's tone was unmistakable, calm, formal, but tense. He was speaking about family reconciliation, about trust, about the damage done by public exposure. Then another voice entered the frame, Meghan's. She was firm, articulate, probing him for emotional reaction. It wasn't an interview. It was surveillance. The agents exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "This could destroy them." The lead investigator paused the recording and shut the laptop. Chain of custody. No leaks, he ordered sharply. But it was too late. Even within the FBI, word had begun to spread. A case that had begun as a cybersecurity inquiry was now transforming into an international scandal. Downstairs, Meghan's household staff were being interviewed one by one. A former housekeeper recalled hearing faint sounds from behind the study wall late at night. Soft voices, mechanical clicks, and once, the sound of playback audio. She'd assumed Meghan was working on a podcast or editing video material. A gardener mentioned technicians visiting the estate months earlier to upgrade soundproofing. Another employee revealed that Meghan often referred to the room as her mirror chamber, saying it was where the truth lived. None of them had understood what she meant. The forensic team cataloged every item in the hidden room. There were notebooks filled with cryptic shorthand, cables tagged with colored tape, and a small safe containing printed transcripts. The transcripts were partial conversations, some redacted, others underlined in Meghan's handwriting. One stood out, a dialogue between two voices identified as King Charles and Prince Harry. The subject was family reputation, privacy, and the monarchy's response to personal interviews. The section Meghan underlined read, "Some things are meant to remain sacred." That single sentence, underlined in ink, told investigators everything they needed to know about her mindset. She wasn't just keeping records. She was curating a narrative, collecting moments that could be used to defend, manipulate, or expose. In the eyes of investigators, the room wasn't just a sanctuary. It was leverage. Back at headquarters, Analysts began decrypting more files from the confiscated drives. Each discovery deepened the mystery. Some recordings were harmless, everyday conversations between Meghan and her staff. Others, however, captured exchanges between senior royals during moments of crisis. There were files corresponding to the Queen's final months, private meetings about royal succession, and even discussions about public statements. Every recording raised new ethical and legal questions. Was Meghan acting alone? Did Harry know? Was anyone else involved? While the world speculated about her motives, the agents who had seen the files knew the truth was far more complex. There was no sign of external hacking, no remote access logs leading to outside parties. Whoever made these recordings had physical proximity. They were in the room when these conversations took place. The conclusion was unsettling. Either Meghan had recorded them herself, or someone had done it for her. In London, advisors urged the palace to remain silent until facts were confirmed. But silence, in a crisis of this scale, only fueled speculation. Within days, headlines across the globe screamed allegations. FBI uncovers secret surveillance operation, royal conversations recorded, William and Harry betrayed. The story had outgrown its origins. It was no longer just a legal investigation. It had become a question of trust, ethics, and betrayal at the heart of one of the world's most famous families. Late that evening, long after the last agents left the Montecito estate, the hidden room stood empty. Its screens were dark, the drives gone, the hum of machines replaced by silence. Yet, if walls could talk, they would have told stories of whispered calls, rehearsed lines, and a woman determined never to be powerless again. The dust in the air seemed to hang like a question mark. What had she planned to do with all that information? Protection? Revenge? Legacy? No one knew. But as the lead investigator closed the front door behind him, he turned to one of his colleagues and said quietly, "This isn't over. You don't build a room like that unless you're expecting a storm." He was right. The storm was coming. In the next chapter, the world would learn what those recordings contained, and why the mention of one name, Prince William, was enough to make even the highest powers in both countries tremble. When the FBI technicians arrived at the Los Angeles field office later that morning, the atmosphere was electric. The evidence crates from Montecito had been secured in a temperature-controlled vault, guarded by both federal security and cyberforensic experts. Each drive was wrapped in tamper-proof film and labeled according to its chain of custody code. The director overseeing the operation made one thing clear: nothing leaves this room, nothing leaks, and nothing gets interpreted until every byte of data has been verified. The stakes weren't just national, they were international. The first drive they examined was marked with a simple letter, W. A senior digital analyst inserted it into an isolated terminal. The room fell silent as lines of code scrolled across the monitor. Encryption, layered multiple times, shielded the contents. It took nearly 6 hours to bypass the first layer. When the files finally appeared, they weren't ordinary audio clips. Each folder was tagged by date, time, and GPS coordinates. The precision was military grade. Every file contained a waveform analysis embedded in its metadata, a clear indication that whoever created them had professional technical assistance. As they opened the first audio file, the familiar sound of the British royal environment filled the speakers. The distinct echoes of palace walls, the muffled shuffle of aides in the background. Then came the voices, formal, deliberate, instantly recognizable. Prince William, King Charles, an aide confirming arrangements for an internal discussion. And then Meghan's voice, smooth, clear, intrusive. She wasn't part of the conversation. She was recording it. The room tensed. An agent hit pause. "Is this from inside the palace?" The analyst nodded grimly. "Metadata places it inside Kensington. 2 years ago." The silence that followed was heavy. This wasn't gossip or speculation anymore. It was digital evidence of a breach of privacy at the highest level. They moved to the next folder. Sandringham meeting. The playback began with ambient sounds of wind and faint laughter, followed by the unmistakable tone of Prince Harry. He sounded tense, arguing about press intrusion, pleading for understanding. Meghan's responses were clipped, controlled. She repeated his words back to him, like someone rehearsing proof. Every exchange felt methodical. One of the analysts muttered, "This isn't emotional. This is documentation." The more they listened, the clearer the pattern became. Each recording followed a structure: date, subject, participants. It resembled a classified archive, meticulously built and catalogued. There were even written summaries embedded in the metadata. Phrases like evidence of bias, manipulative tone, future safeguard. The language suggested purpose, protection, blackmail. No one could tell yet. By mid-afternoon, the team had mapped the scope of the data. 23 drives, nearly 7 terabytes of recordings and notes. The content stretched back to the final months before Meghan and Harry left royal duties. Some files contained phone calls routed through international networks. Others voice memos apparently captured via digital assistants. Technicians confirmed that portions of the data had been transferred to offshore storage nodes in the previous year. Someone had been trying to move the archive out of reach. Meanwhile, in Washington, senior officials were briefed. The presence of foreign political figures in the recordings triggered diplomatic protocols. If conversations involved heads of state or government advisors, the incident could escalate beyond domestic law. The Department of Justice prepared a classified memo summarizing the situation: potential violations of wiretap statutes, possible breaches of national security protocols, and international privacy implications involving a foreign monarchy. The memo's title was short and chilling: Project Mirror. Across the Atlantic, British intelligence received fragments of the same report. At Buckingham Palace, the reaction was disbelief bordering on fury. Advisors convened in private chambers, speaking in hushed tones. One aide said quietly, "If this is true, she's kept a ledger of the crown itself." The Queen's former staff members were contacted for background. No one could recall any authorized recording equipment during royal meetings. The conclusion was unavoidable. The recordings had been made without consent. Inside the FBI analysis room, tension mounted as the team reached the folder labeled Windsor Call. The audio opened with static, then the calm voice of Prince William speaking directly to Meghan. It was a private conversation, part negotiation, part confrontation. He was measured, almost pleading for discretion. She responded with sharp precision, turning each phrase into a recordable statement. The agents listening felt uncomfortable, as though intruding on something sacred. When the file ended, the lead investigator pressed stop and rubbed his forehead. "We need to seal this. This one goes to restricted classification." Technicians began to piece together how the data might have been gathered. Several drives contained traces of remote recording software compatible with mobile devices. It indicated synchronization across multiple accounts. There were also log entries showing network activity linking the Montecito server to encrypted domains registered overseas. Whoever engineered this system had advanced technical expertise and significant funding. It wasn't a hobbyist setup. It was a controlled archive built for longevity. In the following hours, analysts produced transcripts of sample recordings. Each line painted a disturbing portrait, a network of personal moments converted into evidence. There were files capturing Harry confiding doubts about leaving royal life, Charles expressing concern about media backlash, William discussing family reconciliation. None of it appeared edited. It was raw, authentic, unfiltered. The more they read, the heavier the mood became. The analyst responsible for cataloging the voices later described it simply: "It felt like walking through someone's trust, one file at a time." Back at Montecito, Meghan's legal team was preparing a defense narrative. They argued that the recordings were personal notes, stored for security reasons, part of a memoir project, never intended for distribution. But that explanation didn't fit the evidence. The encryption patterns, the hidden routing servers, and the cross-referenced metadata told another story. These weren't private reflections. They were structured archives, built with intent. As night fell, the FBI task force gathered for a final debrief of the day's findings. The lead agent summarized, "We have confirmed unauthorized recordings of foreign nationals, potential breaches of multiple privacy laws, and evidence of data migration. Our next step is verification of voice authenticity and chain origin analysis. Once verified, this material could serve as the foundation for criminal charges. No one spoke. The weight of what they held in their hands was immense. At that moment, in a separate office, a small team of specialists was examining a hidden partition on one of the drives. Inside, it was a document folder titled Royal Reference. Within were digital copies of letters, handwritten notes, and a spreadsheet tracking public statements alongside private remarks. It seemed to map discrepancies between what royals said in public and what they discussed in private. It was detailed, analytical, almost investigative. The final column on each entry bore a single word: leverage. By the end of that week, the codename Mirror had spread quietly through intelligence channels in both countries. Officially, nothing existed. Unofficially, everyone knew that the files from Montecito contained enough to destabilize relationships that had endured for generations. And yet, even within the sterile walls of the FBI lab, questions lingered. Who helped her build the system? How long had it been running? Was it truly for self-protection, or had it become a weapon of control? The answers lay somewhere in those encrypted drives, buried beneath layers of data and fear. When the last agent shut off the lights that night, he glanced at the evidence shelf one final time. Rows of drives, silent and unassuming, sat behind glass, each one capable of detonating reputations across continents. He whispered to himself, "The truth's all here. It just depends on who decides to listen." What came next would prove that listening was only the beginning. The next recordings they would uncover weren't about strategy or politics. They were personal, painfully, intimately personal, and one of them would center entirely on a confrontation between Meghan and Prince William that no one was ever meant to hear. The recording, labeled Windsor Call, became the centerpiece of the entire investigation. For days, federal technicians and forensic analysts handled it with a level of caution reserved for state secrets. The file was triple encrypted, its metadata deliberately scrambled, but its voice print confirmed authenticity within hours. The moment the waveform opened on the monitor, every person in the room fell silent. The signature tone, the cadence, the restrained British composure, it was unmistakably Prince William. The audio began quietly, a faint rustle of paper, a breath, and then William's voice. Steady, measured, but heavy with frustration. "Meghan, you must understand," he said. "This isn't about you being an outsider. It's about how things are done, how they've always been done. You can't just record everything." There was a pause, and then Meghan's voice entered. Smooth, polite, yet charged with underlying defiance. "I record what affects me. I protect what I love." The sound quality was flawless, as if recorded through a direct line rather than ambient capture. Every sigh, every hesitation, every tremor of emotion was preserved in perfect fidelity. The conversation unfolded like a chess match. William spoke of duty, loyalty, and family honor. Meghan countered with individuality, safety, and truth. There were no raised voices, only the sharp edge of conviction clashing against tradition. But as the recording continued, something shifted. William's tone softened. "You've hurt Harry," he said quietly. "You've divided us all. There are things we can forgive, but betrayal isn't one of them." At that moment, the agents listening felt the weight of the words. They weren't hearing a political scandal. They were witnessing a family breaking in real time. Meghan's response came after a pause so long it felt like an eternity. "Betrayal," she said softly, "is when people silence you for telling the truth." The sentence lingered, both defiant and wounded. The recording ran for 26 minutes. Toward the end, William's voice trembled slightly. "Please don't make this worse. You have a choice, Meghan. You always have." And then came the sound that froze everyone in the room. A faint click, followed by a mechanical beep. She was recording him intentionally, and he knew it. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The file ended abruptly, leaving the room filled with static and tension. The lead investigator, a man who had spent 2 decades decoding organized crime wiretaps, leaned back in his chair. "That's not just evidence," he said quietly. "That's a confession of intent." Another analyst added, "She wasn't just saving these for memory. She was building a record of control." Back in London, the recording's existence leaked in fragments. No one in the palace had heard it yet, but its contents were already rumored. The corridors of Kensington Palace buzzed with unease. Advisors whispered about the call, courtiers avoided eye contact, and journalists circled like hawks waiting for official reaction. William, informed of the audio by security briefings, reportedly withdrew from public engagements for 48 hours. His private secretary later told investigators that the prince listened to the full recording once, in silence, before standing up and saying, "She's kept it all." Across the ocean, Meghan remained silent. Her attorneys denied knowledge of any unauthorized recordings, framing the narrative as media manipulation. "Our client has always valued transparency and protection," their statement read, "and any material taken from her property should be viewed within the context of her safety." But behind the legal language, insiders knew panic had set in. She had underestimated the reach of the investigation and the emotional gravity of what she sees control as safety, one analyst said during the briefing. "The more she can record, the less she can be rewritten. It's not just paranoia, it's a defense mechanism," another added quietly. But over time, it became obsession. The timeline confirmed it. The earliest recordings dated back to the final months before the royal exit, moments when media attention was at its peak. But as the couple settled in America, instead of easing, the habit deepened. Meghan's voice logs became more frequent, her notes more detailed. Even mundane calls with PR teams were saved, archived, annotated. By the time the FBI discovered the drives, she had built what amounted to a living diary of sound, an audible map of her life after royalty. What baffled investigators most was how the recordings were structured. They weren't categorized by emotion or chronology, but by theme: trust, power, fear, loyalty. The categories read more like the chapters of a memoir than a database. In each, she seemed to be constructing a story, not for others but for herself. Some of the audio files were paired with reflective notes. One folder contained a series of voice memos labeled Truth Series. In one, she spoke softly to herself, "If I don't keep proof, they'll erase me. This is how women disappear in history. Their words get replaced." Those words struck something in the team. They revealed not a villain, but a woman terrified of being forgotten, of losing her version of reality to a system larger than herself. Yet that same fear, when mixed with power, became dangerous. The recordings had crossed a line, from self-preservation to intrusion. Meanwhile, media analysts and psychologists across the world began weighing in. Some defended her actions as the natural response of a woman constantly vilified by the press. Others condemned them as calculated manipulation. One British commentator summarized it best. "She wanted to protect her truth, but in doing so, she violated everyone else's." In private, Prince Harry's circle spoke of how her behavior had changed over time. "She stopped trusting anyone," said a former staff member. Even Harry had to announce when he entered her study. "She always said, 'Transparency keeps us safe.'" But what she meant was control. The emotional distance between Meghan and Harry had been visible long before the raid. Friends noticed how conversations between them had turned cautious, filtered. Harry, once open and impulsive, now seemed restrained, careful with his words. Some insiders believed he suspected she was recording him. Others thought he was simply overwhelmed by the media chaos. But whatever the reason, the intimacy they once shared had become something else, a careful negotiation of truth. The forensic linguists analyzing Meghan's speech noticed patterns of detachment. Her tone, even in emotional situations, rarely broke. She spoke as if narrating her own story rather than living it. "That's the voice of someone who's already thinking about the audience," one expert observed. "She's speaking for the record, not the person in front of her." Within the seized digital archives, one document stood out, a file named Plan B. It contained outlines and notes resembling a media strategy, a roadmap for potential public disclosures. There were references to leverage points, recorded truths, and timed releases. It was never acted upon, but its existence proved that the recordings had a potential endgame. She wasn't merely archiving. She was preparing for the day those files might become her weapon or her shield. When confronted by investigators, Meghan's legal team framed her actions as misunderstood. "Our client has endured constant invasion of privacy," their statement read. Documenting her own experiences was the only way to protect her mental well-being and her safety. To them, the recordings were a personal archive, a lifeline in a world that misrepresented her every move. But the FBI's findings told a more complex story. The sophistication of the setup, the encrypted backups, and the synchronization between devices pointed to intent far beyond personal safety. Inside the bureau, debates erupted. Some agents saw Meghan as a strategist, cold, manipulative, driven by ego. Others saw a survivor, reactive, defensive, shaped by trauma. "Both can be true," said one senior investigator. "Fear and control often come from the same place." Outside, the world was choosing sides. Public opinion fractured into two camps: those who saw her as a victim of a royal machine, and those who saw her as the architect of her own downfall. Every news channel dissected her motives, her expressions, her past interviews. Every word she had ever spoken about truth and privacy was now replayed in irony. And yet, behind the noise, the simplest explanation was the most haunting. The voice memos found on her drives painted a portrait of a woman who couldn't stop documenting because she didn't know who to trust. Not the institution, not the press, not even her husband. In one memo, recorded late at night, her voice trembled for the first time. "I know they'll turn this against me," she whispered. "But at least I'll have the record. At least I'll have proof." That line stayed with the investigators long after the lights were turned off in the analysis room. Proof of what? Of betrayal? Of manipulation? Or of a woman consumed by the fear that her truth would die without evidence? As more files were decrypted, it became clear that Meghan's archive wasn't only about self-defense. It was about legacy. She had crafted a version of history where she was both narrator and witness, shaping how the world would remember her long after the palace gates closed behind her. Whether that was brilliance or madness depended on who you asked. But the recordings would soon take on a life of their own. As investigators continued to sort through them, they stumbled upon something even more explosive. A file that didn't belong to her narrative of protection or proof. It was something else entirely. A document labeled the Mirror Protocol, containing detailed notes about who knew what, who said what, and when. It read less like a diary and more like an operational map, a plan for information control. Whatever her motive had been, it was no longer simple. It wasn't just about fear or reputation. It was about strategy, a long game of influence and survival played out behind closed doors. And as the FBI prepared to brief the Department of Justice on the contents of the Mirror Protocol, they realized that this investigation was no longer just about Meghan Markle's secret recordings. It was about uncovering whether those recordings were part of a much bigger system. One that stretched beyond Montecito, across borders, and deep into the heart of the royal machine itself. The question wasn't whether she was guilty. It was who else knew, and how far the truth would go once it was unleashed. By the time the sun rose over Washington, D.C., the files from Montecito had already ignited a quiet storm within federal corridors. Behind closed doors, the words "mirror case" appeared on internal memos and encrypted communications. Only a handful of officials had clearance to view the recordings, but in an age of instant information and fragile loyalties, secrets rarely stay buried. The leak didn't begin with a journalist or a rogue aide. It began with curiosity. An anonymous source within the Bureau's Digital Forensics Division had reached out to an old acquaintance, a journalist with deep connections in London. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "What if Meghan's version of truth isn't what it seems? Ask about the Mirror Protocol." Hours later, snippets of classified summaries began circulating through media channels, each one hinting at something darker than anyone imagined. By midday, the story had broken. The headlines flashed across every major network. FBI discovers secret archive of royal conversations. Markle under federal scrutiny. The Windsor recordings. Palace in panic. The world went into collective shock. Meghan Markle, the Duchess who had built her brand on transparency and emotional truth, was now the subject of a federal investigation for secret surveillance. The Bureau scrambled to contain the fallout. Official statements were sterile and unconvincing. "We cannot comment on ongoing investigations," but the damage was irreversible. Within hours, major British tabloids had front-page spreads with grainy photos of evidence boxes leaving Montecito. The Daily Mail declared, "The Duchess's digital deception." The BBC ran a more restrained headline, "Federal inquiry into royal recordings underway." Across the Atlantic, American outlets framed it differently: privacy or paranoia? Meghan's fight for her truth. The public reaction was split. Supporters claimed it was yet another attempt to silence a woman who had dared to challenge the monarchy. Critics accused her of betrayal and deceit. Social media turned into a battlefield. Hashtags like #MirrorFiles, #RoyalLeaks, and #MeghanUnderFire trended globally. Memes, conspiracy threads, and amateur analysis flooded the internet, each claiming to know what was hidden on those drives. Inside Buckingham Palace, chaos erupted. The Queen's advisors were furious that such sensitive material had been confirmed through a U.S. agency before royal channels were informed. Prince William's aides were instructed to secure all personal communications. King Charles demanded briefings every 2 hours. Behind the scenes, calls were exchanged between British intelligence and U.S. diplomatic representatives. The question was no longer what Meghan had recorded, but why the FBI was willing to confirm it existed at all. The answer lay in the leak. The journalist who broke the story had more than rumors, they had evidence. Within the first article, a partial transcript appeared. The excerpt was unmistakable. William's voice, Meghan's rebuttal, a few lines that encapsulated the tension between privacy and exposure. Those words spread faster than any image could. "You've hurt Harry," followed by, "Betrayal is when people silence you for telling the truth." Public trust fractured instantly. For royal loyalists, it was sacrilege, the sanctity of family exposed to global ridicule. For Meghan's defenders, it was proof of the system's double standard. But for the investigators, it was something else entirely: a breach of federal secrecy. The leak of those transcripts meant someone inside the Bureau had compromised the case, and that meant the investigation had just grown bigger. Within 24 hours, the DOJ opened an internal audit. Agents' digital logs were checked. Communication histories were analyzed. The source of the leak remained unidentified. But every hour the story grew, drawing more attention to what the FBI had hoped to contain. Every network now wanted access to the files. Every royal commentator speculated about what else was hidden: calls, recordings, evidence of manipulation. Meanwhile, Meghan's PR team launched a full-scale response campaign. Carefully worded statements flooded social media, painting her as a victim of hacking, framing the leak as an invasion of her private safety data. In one official release, her representatives claimed, "The files seized by the FBI contain personal materials created for a memoir project. They include private reflections, meditations, and voice notes not meant for public consumption." But that defense fell apart when new leaks surfaced. Someone within the FBI had shared fragments of metadata from the files. Details like timestamps, GPS coordinates, and cross-device links. The implication was undeniable. Many recordings had been captured without consent. Talk shows across the world erupted in debates. Was Meghan a whistleblower or a manipulator? A truth-teller or a traitor? As the noise grew louder, something deeper began to unfold within royal circles. A former palace communications officer, speaking anonymously, confirmed that internal royal meetings had indeed been compromised. "There were always suspicions," he admitted. "She'd ask oddly specific questions, recall things said in confidence. We assumed she had informants. We never imagined she was recording." For the first time in decades, the royal institution felt vulnerable to exposure from within. The monarchy's greatest strength, its control over image, was crumbling. Every broadcast, every interview, Every public smile now looked different under the lens of those recordings. In California, federal vehicles returned to Montecito under heavy media scrutiny. This time, they weren't there to seize, they were there to protect. After the leak, the FBI feared further breaches or tampering. The mansion's perimeter was sealed again, this time with local police support. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as agents moved equipment in and out. The silence around the estate was suffocating. Inside, Meghan was said to be furious. One staff member described her pacing the hallway, her voice rising with disbelief. "They twisted everything," she said. "They made me look like a criminal for protecting myself." But beneath the anger was fear that control had slipped from her hands. For years, she had been the narrator of her own story. Now, someone else held the pen. Prince Harry, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Reports suggested he had traveled briefly to London, unannounced, for private discussions with palace representatives. Whether to defend or distance himself from Meghan remained unclear. The brothers did not speak. The silence between them had become a chasm. As the investigation widened, leaks continued. New transcripts hinted at recordings beyond family matters, discussions with advisors, conversations about royal charities, even moments involving international guests. Each revelation pulled the story further into chaos. The British government quietly reached out to U.S. counterparts, requesting confidentiality under diplomatic channels. It was denied. The FBI director himself ordered a press lockdown. All staff were instructed to refrain from comment. But in the digital age, control was an illusion. Every attempt to suppress the story only fueled curiosity. Independent journalists began tracing Meghan's communication network, uncovering links to data storage facilities overseas. They found evidence of cloud accounts registered under pseudonyms, payment records matching the timeline of data transfers. It became clear that Meghan had built more than an archive. She had built a shadow system, one that could survive even if she didn't. Every file had been mirrored across encrypted servers, accessible only through complex keys. In essence, she had created her own vault of truth, untouchable and eternal. The revelation terrified both sides of the ocean. If she still had access to even a portion of those backups, she could release them at will. By the end of that week, a single question dominated every newsroom, every palace meeting, and every online thread. How much more was there? The leaked files were just the surface. The full scope of what Meghan had recorded, and what she intended to do with it, remained buried. In London, William reportedly told an aide, "This isn't about reputation anymore. It's about trust, and that's something we'll never get back." In Washington, the lead investigator updated the DOJ with grim clarity. The subject's data system shows deliberate redundancy. Even if we shut down every known server, multiple backups exist globally. The information cannot be destroyed. And in Montecito, as the cameras flashed and the gates held firm, Meghan sat by the window of her darkened study, the same room that once hid her secrets. Outside, the world speculated. Inside, she whispered to herself, "They'll never hear the full story. Not yet." But she was wrong. Because what came next, the next wave of decrypted files, the next round of confessions, would not only deepen the scandal. It would change the royal narrative forever. The morning the leak broke globally, Prince Harry was thousands of miles from Montecito, isolated in a private lodge outside London, trying to process what he'd just read. The moment he saw the headlines, "FBI uncovers secret recordings from Montecito, Royal brothers betrayed," he felt his chest tighten. It was the one nightmare he had prayed would never come true. He had known Meghan was private. He had known she recorded notes, voice memos, and conversations for her projects. But this was something else entirely. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, was now at the center of a federal investigation, accused of recording his family, his blood. For hours he didn't move. The phone rang incessantly. Calls from lawyers. Calls from palace intermediaries. Calls from aides who didn't know whether to address him as prince, duke, or witness. He let them all go to voicemail. The weight of betrayal, not from his wife yet, but from the chaos consuming both sides of his life, sat heavy in his chest. When his private secretary finally reached him, Harry's voice was flat. "Tell me it's not true." There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet, "They found the room, sir. It's real." The air left his lungs. He pressed his palm to his forehead, eyes closed, as fragments of memories came rushing back. Nights when Meghan stayed up late in her study, whispering into her recorder, saying she was documenting her thoughts for the book. Times he'd walked into the room and she'd quickly shut her laptop, smiling too quickly, saying, "You wouldn't understand." He had thought it was harmless, a creative habit. Now he wondered how long she had been documenting not just herself, but him, their arguments, their private calls with his brother, even the family meetings that he begged to keep secret. The first statement from Buckingham Palace arrived within hours. It was cold, measured, and devastating in its restraint. The palace is aware of ongoing investigations by U.S. authorities. We will refrain from comment while matters are under review. There was no mention of names, but the implication was clear. Inside the royal family, Harry's name was now tied to hers in the worst possible way. Later that afternoon, a message arrived from William through an intermediary. Only 4 words: "You need to choose." Harry stared at the text for a long time, his jaw tightening. It wasn't a threat. It was a line drawn in blood. Choose the woman who said she'd protect him from the monarchy, or the family he'd been raised to protect from the world. That night, Harry made a call to Meghan. The line was quiet for a long time before she answered. "You've seen the news," she said softly. He exhaled, trying to keep his voice steady. "Tell me it's exaggerated. Tell me they're lying." She didn't. "They took everything out of context," she replied. "Those recordings weren't for blackmail, Harry. They were for truth. I was protecting us." "Protecting us?" His tone cracked. "You recorded my brother, my father, our conversations." His words hung heavy, each one a wound. Meghan's reply came calm, rehearsed. "Because they were already recording us, through the press, through their people. You know that." But Harry shook his head, pacing the room. "That's not the same, Meghan. You don't protect trust by destroying it." Silence. Then, in a voice barely audible, Meghan said, "You think